Now that we have described the necessary condition of Pareto efficiency, we may ask whether a real-world economy will achieve this apparently desirable state. The fundamental theorem of welfare economics provides an answer. As long as producers and consumers act as perfect competitive, that is, take prices as given, then uncertain, the under certain condition, a Pareto allocation of resources merges. Does a competitive economy automatically allocate resources efficiently without any need for centralized direction? In a way, the fundamental theorem merely formalizes an insight that has long been recognized. When it comes to providing goods and services, free enterprises systems are amazingly productive. Uh, a rigorous proof of fundamental theory requires fairly sophisticated mathematics, but we can provide an intuitive justification. The essence of competition is that all people face the same prices. Each consumers and producer is so small relative to the market that his actions alone cannot affect prices. Uh, these are the assumptions. All consumers and producers are in perfect competition. um, Market exists for each and every commodity, then a resource allocation is Pareto efficient, right? From microeconomics consumer theory, we know that marginal rate of substitution is equal to the relative prices. Since prices are the same for all people, therefore MRS of person A is equals to the MRS person of B. Um, give the first part of Pareto efficiency. From the basic microeconomics economics theory, a perfect competition firm produces where prices equals to MC. Therefore, uh, we can write relative marginal cost equals to the relative prices. But we know that the MRT is the ratio of MCs. Therefore, we can replace the ratio of prices marginal cost with MRT. Um, Again, from microeconomic consumer theory, this changes to MRT is equals to MRS, um, which satisfy the second requirement of Pareto efficiency. Pareto efficiency requires that the prices be in the same ratio as marginal cost, and competition guarantee this condition is met. The marginal cost of commodity is the additional cost to society of providing it. Um, this requires the additional cost of each commodity to be reflected in its prices. Therefore, we can expand Pareto efficiency to imply that MRT is equals to the ratio of MC or X and MCY for the person A and person B and the relative prices. You can write it. Uh, Now we will discuss the role of fairness. If properly functioning competitive market allocate resources efficiently, what role does the government have to play in the economy? Uh, Pareto efficient was the only concern competitive markets automatically achieve it, and there would be very little need for government. Um, Only a very small government would appear to be appropriate. Its main function would be to establish a setting in which property rights are protected so that competition can work. Government provides law and order, a court system, and national defense. Anything more is superfluous. However, such reasoning is based on the superficial understanding of fundamental theorems. Things are really much more complicated. For one thing, it has implicitly being assumed that efficiency is the only criterion for deciding if a government given allocation of resources is good. It is not obvious, however, the Pareto efficiency by itself is desirable. Government would exist to protect property right, law, code, but Pareto efficiency does not consider uh, distribution. One person could get all society resources while everyone else starves. This isn't typical socially optimal. This is the again algebra box. Uh, uh, we consider a simple model in which the total quantity of goods is fixed. Uh, let's this figure reproduce the contract curve of O and O dash. Compare the two allocation of A and C, right? Uh, because A lies on the contract curve, by definition, it is Pareto efficient. On the other hand, C is inefficient. Is allocation A therefore better? That depends on what is mean by better. To the extent that society prefers a relatively equal distribution of real income, C might be preferred to C might be preferred to A, even though C is not Pareto efficient. On the other hand, society might not care about distribution at all, or perhaps care more about Makkah and Suzanne. In this case, A would be better to C. The key point is that criterion of Pareto efficiency by itself is not enough to rank alternative allocation of resources. Rather, explicit value judgment are required on the fairness of the distribution of utility. To formalize this concept, note that the contract curve implicitly defines a relationship between maximum amount of utility that Makkah can attain for each level of Suzanne, right? Fairness for each level of one person, there is a maximum utility of other. Graphing each utility against the other gives us the utility possible curve, which is derived from the contract curve. It shows the maximum amount of one person utility given the other utility, individual utility. Just typical utility function of good consumed u, x and y. Um, there is a refer to the social welfare function can produce social indifference curve. This is the utility possibility curve. Point A correspond to the point this A, right? And this is C, which is correspond to this C. Uh, here's at point A, Suzanne's utility is relative high compared to the Maccas. Uh, point P, point uh, B, point B uh, is the opposite, right? Point C, uh, because uh, because C, let me show you again. This C is of the contractor. So it must be the inside the utility curve, reflecting that the fact that it's possible to increase one person's utility without decreasing the other. All points on or below the utility positive curves are attainable by society. All points above it are not attainable. By definition, all points on this utility curve are Pareto efficient, but they are represent very different distribution of real income. Which point is best? The conventional way to answer this question is to postulate a social welfare function, which embodies society's views on the relative deservedness. Imagine that just an individual welfare depends on the quantity of commodities she consumes. Society's welfare depends on the utility of each of its members, right? This curve, welfare function, society welfare function. Again, the concept is all points on the curve are Pareto efficient and below are not, um, unattainable. An indifference curve farther from the origin represents the higher level of social welfare. Um, Fairness. If we superimpose social indifference curve on the top of the utility curves, we can find the Pareto efficient point, right? This leads to a second fundamental theory of welfare, which we'll discuss later. Maximizing social welfare. Point two is preferred to point two is preferred to point I. Suzanne, even though two is not Pareto efficient, right? Two is not Pareto efficient. The highest possible social welfare is 3. It's Pareto efficient.